Hello and welcome to another Imperfectly Perfect conversation for the Flourishing Education podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Sophie Smith-Tong. A very warm welcome to the podcast, Sophie.
Hi, Fabienne. Thank you so much for having me. It's a really lovely way to spend my Wednesday morning.
Wonderful. Well, I'm delighted we've finally found a time that works for us both because we've been
Yeah.
having a bit of an offline conversation, right? To try and make
Yeah.
this happen.
It's busy, isn't it, education, trying to find that space.
Yeah. And the space is so important, I feel. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Great. So, Sophie, can we start where I always start with all of my guests, which is, who are you? Where are you in the world? And what has been your journey thus far?
So I'm Sophie Smith-Tong. I am currently in North London. I was born in Southeast London, but moved north when I went to university and never went back, much to my parents' dismay. But my journey in education, I was working in retail. And wanted something more rewarding, and had actually done my work experience when I was 16 in a primary school. So it must have been planted right there. And my family always said that I would end up in a what they called a caring profession. I was quite empathetic and caring as a child. So I think my mind immediately went back to that memory and trained to become a teacher at 26. So I've been in teaching around 16 years now. Um, and it's funny, I quit teaching in 2021, thinking that I would never go back, and launched Mindfulness for Learning and desperately wanted to go back into the classroom to practice what I was preaching, really. I found that I wanted to be authentic when I went and spoke to people, when I did talks. And so decided to go back into the classroom, but continue running Mindfulness for Learning, which is my wellbeing centre for educators and families. So I've been a teacher, early years specialist is that's where my heart is, the early years, although I've taught every year in primary. Early years is kind of where I belong, and I currently have a reception class and have been at the school that I'm at, I've been a reception teacher for 4 years. I'm mental health and wellbeing lead and have been for around 7 years now. Um, and run my business and author of Teacher Autonomy, which is due out on the 22nd of January. So lots to unpack there, Fabienne. Sorry.
No, that's wonderful. I love. I mean, like, there's so much I resonate with already that you've shared. So you may know that I call myself a recovering language teacher.
Mm,
So like you, for me, 2021 was a big year because that's when I asked for a 1 year unpaid career break from my job, which was language director in a university, in the UK. So I resonate so much with this. What I sense in what you've not said, which is like, leaving the profession and thinking you will never return.
mm,
Um, because that's what when I took my sabbatical, I wasn't sure because I think there's something around, and perhaps we can linger here, right? Like you've returned in the classroom. So
mm.
I think I often sort of say to my friends, once a teacher, always a teacher. Like I feel it in my heart.
Yeah,
And I feel this caring, like the caring for is definitely what got me in the classroom like you.
yeah,
Except that I think I've taught across all of the years, so from nursery all the way to higher education. But I think where my heart is at is much more like the higher education. That's where
yeah,
I am the most at ease. Um, but going back to what you said, there's something about I'm hearing unspoken tensions between um, that love and care
mm,
that we teachers and a lot of female teachers I speak to feel and express that.
yeah,
And the I assume the systemic issues that make it challenging for caring human
yeah.
beings to be in the space. So is that true, or is that me putting my stuff on your stuff?
No, that's really true, and that is why I left because I think there's a certain point if you're not careful that you run out of steam, and for want of a better word, I don't like to use a combative word, but you run out of fight in the kindest possible way. Um, because there's, in my book, I've spoken about this idea that when we challenge the system, it's exhausting, and we have to learn to take the baton and then pass it on sometimes, and just do your day job. And I've since coming back, I've recognized that balance, that sometimes I just need to be a class teacher that isn't fighting for change. And I just have to concentrate on the day ahead with the children that I've got and be present. And I think launching Mindfulness for Learning allowed me to have the space and time to feel like I'm trying to make change, which gives me the strength to go in and be with the system as it is and work around it. Without Mindfulness for Learning, I don't think I could continue teaching, or without writing the book. I think it's because it's balanced out. And you're right. I think the teaching profession is so caring. That's why all of us get into it. And because you care, you can't work in a way that you know is damaging, not without challenging in some way, whatever that may look for people. So yeah, there's definitely that tension, and I've found my peace with it in a way.
I love that. I love what you're pointing to. And perhaps that's why you've been able to get back in the classroom, I'm hearing. Um,
Yeah.
because, like I often say, this cliche of you can't pour from an empty cup or
Hmm.
like an empty tank, right? Like a lot of people use that, or put your oxygen mask on first, like all of those analogy that, you know, like you, I'm trained in mindfulness. So we often use those analogies, right? Um, but the reality is that in a caring profession, if your tank is empty, to me, forget it. Like
Mm.
there is no way. And what I heard when you said like I've found my peace and like that space and time, it almost sounds to me like you've carved out a space for Sophie, the individual,
Mm.
to care for herself. Um,
Yeah.
so does that also feel true to you? Like in a sense that I more and more I'm thinking, well, actually, if the individual is in survival mode,
Hmm.
which is how I felt when I handed in my when I asked my boss for a sabbatical, I sent him a picture of a lemon and I said, "This is me, and I can't give you the skin and the pips, so
Right. Yeah.
he's gonna have time out." Um, so I'm sorry, I've given you quite a lot, but I wonder whether that feels true to you, that you have found a space for you to almost like refill your tank through mindfulness for learning. And is that
Yeah.
true?
Yeah, absolutely. I went through a journey. I think it was 2019. I got asked to be part of a pilot project for the Mindfulness in Schools project. It was piloting their teacher mindfulness, the 8 weeks that you have to do before you train the children and train to teach the children, sorry. And said yes. I'd never really engaged with mindfulness, but I just thought, oh, this sounds interesting. So it was an 8 week course online, and I did that, and it really shifted everything. Um, and I wouldn't say that I'm kind of your typical. I mean, I've always practiced yoga, but it's not really something that I would expect of myself. If somebody had said that, mindfulness will shift you, I probably would have gone, yeah, I'm not really sure that's for me. But it really did, and made me less reactive, as it does. Um, and with that, I was able to sit with difficulty more. And I think there was a lot there that I was distracting from. And because I was sitting with it kind of forced me to go through the challenges and the difficulty, which kind of like a messy cupboard. It got very messy for me. I had to pull it all out and then put it back in an organized manner. And it was quite a difficult journey personally. So I think the I had to do the inner work. It's like Greg Bottrell talks about the inner child, and he's doing a lot of work at the moment on, the adults that are teaching the children. It's really important that we do our own work, because otherwise we pass on the difficulties to the children, or we're less patient, or we're more reactive. And that work that I did on myself, it wasn't easy and it took years and it's ongoing, it's lifelong work, but it enabled me to be more present with the children and understand that actually we are not preparing these children for life. This is their life. They are living their life every day, and I am providing them with experiences that they hopefully will remember and will shape the person that they maybe not become because there's no end product, but shape the person that they are in that moment and in the future and continue to change and mold and adapt. So, yeah, I really think that that inner work is so important and it really can change everything.
I couldn't I couldn't agree more. Like, yeah, like the inner outer for sure.
Mm,
Um, and I'll go back to one thing you said. You said, if I heard you correctly, like I didn't think mindfulness. If you'd said mindfulness would have shifted me, then I
mm,
wouldn't have believed you because it wasn't really like I'm not the kind of person that sort of does mindfulness, I guess.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
and so um, I'm I'm interested in that because um, as a recovering language teacher, what I talk about a lot is how I too have been on a journey for the last 18 years when I became a mum for the first time. To I made the choice when I held my eldest, who turned 18 in November, for the first time, that I would never reproduce the harm or try not to, the patterns that the adults in my life had created for me
Mm,
unconsciously, because it's unconscious. I know I speak to my mom and dad almost like really regularly, not every week, not every day, but most days. And I know they love me in their imperfectly perfect way,
mm,
or perfectly imperfect way. But I promised myself that I try not to reproduce those. So like you have been on a journey of that inner, right? Like the inner work. And it's painful. Um, but I think what you said about like I'm not the type, right? I think for me, I don't know if it's been true for you as well, but I feel like I've been so conditioned.
mm,
I'm a white working class French woman who has been told by her dad the way out of being working class is you have to hop on this hamster wheel and go, right? Like effort,
mm.
struggle, and make your way. Um, and that has been almost like an a learning journey of that, of like of what feels like has been paradigms in like beliefs that I've adopted and
Mm,
like shedding them and letting them go. Does that
mm.
feel also
Yeah, I mean, I'm from a working class background, and I guess the idea of mindfulness it feels like such a privileged thing, doesn't it? It does have that kind of package to it, and so there's lots of things we feel when we come from a working class background that maybe we're not entitled to or we shouldn't have. Um, and obviously, I really recognize my privilege. White working woman, I've come from a working class background, but I'm now teaching. I'm very comfortable financially due to my teaching. And I really recognize that privilege, but you can't help but reflect on where you've come from and what that's done for me. Um, so I do think there was a barrier there in terms of accepting that maybe something like mindfulness might be able to help me. And I also think that, just reflecting on the education system in general and the staff teams that are working there, this idea of mindfulness and well-being feels very, we're used to fads in education. Things come and go, and we're used to being told to do things by people who maybe are not on the ground, and maybe don't have an understanding, or at least we feel that they don't have an understanding. And for many teachers, the idea of doing mindfulness and well-being is a sticking plaster because it's we're not working, the system isn't working with a well-being lens. So to ask staff to think about mindfulness and well-being when they're working in a system that's opposed to it it's kind of patronizing and it can feel like that. So I'm kind of thankful that I came across mindfulness before it became, I think now we're at a point where we're going to have to change the way we work with mindfulness. It's changing a lot because mindfulness wasn't really spoken about in schools as much when I did my course. So I was a bit more open to it. But I feel like now that we're closing off to it a little bit more, it's gone on a bit of a journey. And I run a staff group every January in my school where people can optionally come in for an 8 week journey with mindfulness and we can look into what it might do to their habits and work patterns. It's really hard to get people to sign up. And not because they don't want to better their lives, but I think it's just misunderstood. And actually, when people do come, they're like, wow, actually, this really isn't just about breathing. This is about unpicking. This is about thinking about how we respond to things and habits and autopilot and routines, workload. Like there's so much to unpick there. So yeah, I definitely think that on the face of it, it can feel unachievable, that it's not for us, but really it's for everyone.
And I think what you're pointing to is something that I'm trying to look at with my PhD, um, because like like what you've described. So I'm a trained mindfulness teacher. I've done so many modalities on my journey to like the doing the inner work.
Mm,
So it one thing that I often got really frustrated with at the institution where I worked is that in the middle of a marking period or a busy time, we as staff would get emails telling us, hey, it's well-being week. When you're in the middle of marking 40 essays, and why don't you go and do some meditation or some Reiki? And I used to feel so, and I practice mindfulness daily,
yeah.
right? I used to get really irate because I
Mm,
felt like saying, like, do you not have a clue that
mm,
actually don't send me your email about well-being because right now, contextually, I
yeah.
feel anything but well-being, and I feel like anything like you don't care about my well-being, right?
Mm, yeah.
And I think in what you've shared, there's something around also like the social and the contextual, because that white privilege. So like the reality about mindfulness is that it came from Kabat-Zinn mainly, right?
Mm,
And it's been borrowed from traditions like Indian and like yoga and like
yeah.
Buddhism that have been practicing for years and years, right? To turn into a well-being industry.
Yeah.
And so there's a part of me that feels like you also, like there's frictions, because
Mm,
I would love your take on that. Where I'm at right now is like I agree with you. I think like the way I talk about the well-being is, or I talked about in the flourishing student, from why I emerged with the conversations with the young people at uni, is that actually to be well, we need to be grounded, safe in the knowledge that I'm okay, I have enough, and I feel my emotions, all of those things, right? Like the most three basic needs of effectively of like not being in survival, that they're essential, right, for our
mm,
well-being. But actually the context really matters,
yeah.
and the context makes it that the reality as a social psychologist is that the inequities are baked in the system and they're
Yeah.
continued right through.
Hmm.
um, and so how do we address both, right? It's a both me and we, so we
Hmm.
create the us. um and I get a sense that a lot of the work, and in particular like your book, sort of like talks to that. So
Yeah, it really does come down to the hierarchy in it that's so prevalent in education. And I think there's a lot being done to educators rather than with. And so you get whole groups of people who are missed out. in, it can be on a wider in a wider context, but also on a specific, if you think about, say, I put on a mindfulness course, or after school, if I work in a children's centre in a school and they're together, but if I do it at 4 o'clock, the people who are on shift work in the children's centre can't access it. So that's like a very physical barrier there. But there's so much nuance in education, and there's also a lot of different people, individuals. We're all different. We're all got different experiences, and so if we don't have that, Dr. James Mannion talks about these slice teams. Rather than having that hierarchy, we pull people from all parts of the school and we listen. And I think teachers have stopped talking because they're not heard. And so we have this real problem of silencing, and the voices that we need to hear in order to have that equitable experience, we don't hear. And so what we end up doing is just following negative conventions, patterns, routines that are detrimental, firstly to the teacher and or anyone who's working in education, which will undoubtedly pass on to children, because then we don't have the energy to challenge those damaging systems or routines of the day. So yeah, it's really deeply ingrained. And I think with the book, that's how it came together, because what I started noting over the years was all these very specific things, like from how people spoke to each other in education, how I was being spoken to as a teacher from maybe higher up. And I'm talking about my 16-year experience, not necessarily the school I'm working at now. But also, it's not a personal thing. I should say that, that it's not a pointing the finger of one person for who they are. It's the fact that we've stopped thinking about how we're talking to people. We all do it. I use this example in my talk, actually, that so there was some phonics feedback. I spoke to hundreds of educators as part of the research for the book, and one of the teachers told me that the positive feedback they were given for their phonics lessons were that they had competent card control. So the way they moved the phonics cards was effective. And I think, I don't know anything about the person that observed or said those words. But what I do know, what it does tell me, is that we've stopped thinking about what we're saying and how that might be received. And also the infantilizing of the profession. This teacher was an experienced teacher, and the positive was that she held phonics cards correctly. Let's unpick that.
I mean, it's
It's
funny, but not funny.
I know, isn't it? But then it's so, when I talked about this in a recent event that I did, people are all of a sudden going, yeah, like that happens to me. And I couldn't believe how many people were saying, yeah, that kind of thing happened to me. And it is happening everywhere because we've stopped talking and we've started to accept that this is just the way we get treated now as professionals. That's it. We've just got to accept it, or we haven't got the energy to challenge it. And some people work in really toxic environments where it's literally impossible to challenge anything like that. So, I really feel a sense of responsibility in that I am now in a position where I can speak up about that stuff, and I'm going to, because somebody has to. And that's what the book is really. It's a calling out of all the nonsense for teachers. It's like, this is happening in our schools. Let's do something about it. And it is really hopeful. It's not a negative rant. It's really hopeful that we can make shifts to change the current working conditions of teachers. And in it, there are tips for classroom teachers. There are tips for senior leaders because they're also in a really difficult position. And there's tips for government officials in terms of how we look at systemic change in giving autonomy to teachers.
Amazing. So yeah, I mean, like, so good that you've written this book, and it's so needed. My colleague Natalie and I have just submitted the first draft for our book, that looks at like the whole of education, and that echoes a lot of what you've said. So yes, yes, yes. Like,
Yeah.
the more people actually shout out and sort of start saying, this isn't good enough. I
Yeah.
think what I love about what you're doing is that teachers, often, like a lot of, as a recovering teacher, I really felt that is like you almost feel like you're being pulled in so many directions, right? Like that you stretch so thin.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I don't know if it's been your experience. Yeah, like there's something around. Of course, we know that more and more with the helicopter parenting,
Mm.
parents are asking more and more questions, and rightly so, right? Like I think it's
Mm.
really important that parents are involved. Um, and I think for me, like the gap between in primary school versus like secondary school, it felt like when my two went to secondary school, I was standing on the edge of the harbor, putting my kids on this cruise liner, and off they go.
Yeah.
It was a real shift in terms of like presence for the parents.
Mm.
Um, but the challenges to that parents may bring to a teacher, as well as like the challenges that we get from the top down, right? So like
Mm.
these things around being told how we are to be in the classroom, right? Like oh, well done for holding those cards so well. I mean, what
Yeah.
really? Um, so can we linger here a bit more
Mm.
in terms of that? Because to me, like agency is is one of our most basic needs, is to do with our inner power, right? Like
Mm.
being able to do things and say things or be ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. It's a motivator. Daniel Pink talks about the three things that help motivate us as humans: mastery, purpose, autonomy. They're the top three. It's if we, I think over the years, I've always known that something wasn't quite right for me. I think the first video that they showed me at university when I did my PGCE was the Ken Robinson, the most popular TED talk, Do Schools Kill Creativity? And I remember walking out of there and thinking, hang on, some things are falling into place here for me in terms of my own education, but also the kind of teacher that I want to be and why I might want to get into education, because it definitely wasn't clear when I picked it. I felt like just did it and then did the reflection. But there is, I think there's been a journey over the part, well, since I've been in teaching, that it has just it's got worse and worse in terms of the scripted and prescriptive nature of teaching. And I remember in my NQT year being really surprised because at university it was all about play, autonomy for children, the way this child development, and we're learning all of these things. And then I entered the world of education and went, hang on a minute, I can't do any of that stuff. So I don't understand. So by the end of my first year in teaching, I was actually in therapy because I was working in a school that was extremely toxic, but I was also told that I wasn't allowed to do anything that I wanted to do. I wasn't allowed to do play-based learning, and I was in reception. So I was watching children sat at tables who were 4 and 5 crying, doing workshops. It just felt so wrong.
That's
Um,
horrendous.
horrendous, isn't
And
it?
really
And that school, might I say, had an outstanding Ofsted that year.
yeah, of course, because they're doing the things the that are expected, like control and
It looks tidy, doesn't it?
yeah.
It looks in control. It looks okay.
Yes, needs no chaos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And play can seem a little bit overwhelming for people who don't understand it. But yeah, I definitely think that I've recognized actually the theme in all of this is the lack of connection that I'm able to make to my work.
Mm.
I feel like I started to think, oh, I'm going in, but I'm not connecting to anything I'm teaching anymore. And it's just I'm going in and doing the job and leaving. And that, like you talk about that heart, I've recognized that's actually, of course, really important that my heart is in my job. And, with my current job, it makes me realize that when you've got heart in it, you don't want to leave. Like, I love going in and being with the children that I have in my class. Genuinely. I love because I'm able to connect. I'm given the space to connect with them heart to heart, human in a human way. And if we don't have that, then we are just going in and we're robots. When there isn't the connection, and the children need that as much as we do, of course. So yeah, there is a definite deterioration of it, and I'm seeing it with all the messages that I get, with the talks that I do, and the conversations I'm having with educators. I think it is the biggest problem in our education system. There are many, as James calls it, a polycrisis. There is a crisis, everywhere. But I think if teachers were trusted, if the education system changed that stance, it could change everything. Because what we start doing is seeing things as life in a human way and listening to the individual, you know, with that, everything could change. Do I think it will change quickly? No. But like you say, the more of us that talk about it, the more likely it is to get people on board. And actually, by talking about it, we're giving permission to people like that teacher who felt a little bit disgruntled by that comment of having competent card control. What we're saying to that teacher is that's okay to feel disgruntled by that. That's not really okay. And then maybe the teachers out there that hear me say it, that have said that to their teachers, go, oh yeah, that is really a patronizing thing to say. Because I don't think they did it to be mean. I think they just did it because that's how we've come to work.
And also because, in a way, like going back to being cogs in the machine, that's how I felt. I felt like a little cog in the machine. So
Mm.
5 years ago, no, maybe more than that, 2018, I stopped using the word busy. So because for me, the word busy, which everybody in education uses like a badge of honor, because it's
Mm.
like, look at how busy I am, this like good little productive little ant.
Mm.
For me, it used to send me in a frenzy. So I can't do busy. I'm not busy. I have things that I need to do, but
Yeah.
that busy is out of the question. And I think the thing is, the system, like the way we've created our neoliberal capitalist world, is that it is like busy is worn like a badge of honor, because a little hamster in our wheel going, the more you show you're productive, then the less likely the cog is going to be removed and replaced, right, by someone
Mm.
else. um
Yeah.
and so therefore, for me, when I noticed I was in survival mode, um and of course, in survival mode, the only thing you can focus on is me, myself, and I, because you're so worried and scared.
Mm.
Then, yeah, of course, you're sharper with your words, and you're you're curt. And if you're busy, you don't have time and space for others,
Mm.
because you haven't got time and space for you, right?
Yeah.
Um, so more and more, like for me, this is where that having the space and time and like hearts of like to go back to the heart and going back to um just imperfectly perfect conversations and perfectly
Mm.
imperfect conversations, um because this is so foreign to what the systemically we're doing, right?
Yeah. And again, with the busyness, it's that looking in control, looking tidy. And as humans, our brains are going to want, when especially if we're entering a classroom, for Ofsted or a head teacher comes in, they're entering it for a very small amount of time. And as teachers who have a lot of high stakes accountability measures to meet, there can be this real fear, or there is this real fear that someone will walk in and make judgment on who you are as a professional because things do not look neat, tidy, and quiet. And the same is true of teachers with their workload. There is become this thing that busy is means that you're doing a good job. And if you're not busy, it's seen as a failure and maybe you're not pulling your weight. And this idea that also the pressure to take on more as a teacher, I'm finding a real pattern with that teachers who obviously cost more the more experience you've got, but there's a reason they cost more. They bring a wealth of experience. But because you cost more, you have to be seen to take on more in terms of a teaching and learning responsibility. And if you don't want to do that, that's seen as a failure. It's like, well, why do you not want to pull your weight? And it's like, well, I am. I'm doing more than I should do for the money that I get, but that's because I love my job and my heart's in it. So there is this real pressure to, on the surface, everything needs to look in control. And as a teacher, I think that part of that letting go, which where mindfulness comes in for me, is that being able to go, well, if someone walks into my classroom and it looks like chaos to them, they're going to need to do the work. Be curious about it. Ask me about it. I'll tell you about it because I can talk for hours about my intentions. I can talk for hours about why it looks the way it does, why that individual child holds their pencil like that, why that child isn't sat on the carpet. I can tell you all of that. So don't walk in and judge, walk in and be curious. And I am here for you to help you understand what's going on. And it's really about that confidence. And I urge all professionals to, if you don't feel confident, seek out support and make sure you're getting the professional learning, because that's something else that senior leaders need to do, is that when a teacher maybe does seem like they're struggling, it's not a why aren't you pulling your weight, it's what can I do to support this member of staff. Maybe they're not, because this misconception of autonomy is that it's done on its own, that you're on your own, and that it's a free for all, and that there is no support. You just go off and do what you want, and that's not autonomy. Autonomy can only be achieved through really great professional learning opportunities, a supportive team, and collaboration. We can't work in the way we want to work if we don't have the tools to do it. So, it's about thinking about your responses to what you see in a classroom, but also how you feel when someone responds that way, and working on that confidence of your own practice.
Amazing. And you know what? So there's two things I've noticed: how energetically the words. So like when you describe what it feels like to control, and like,
Mm,
how contracted I feel when you describe those. And inversely, when you talk about like your classroom and play and knowing which child holds a pen which way and why they're not on the carpet, and
mm,
there's the opposite. It feels expansive and joyful, and that curiosity for me, I is we are curious, lifelong, life-wide, life deep learners. That's what we
mm,
have been, and we'll always be until we die, right? Like as
mm.
this being, and the system teaches us something completely different.
Yeah.
Um, but when I'm hearing you speak, I really feel it, like
Yeah.
in
It's a physical response, I think.
yes,
It
yeah.
is. And I talk about that in the well-being section of the book, because if we think about all the add-ons that we have, I am a mental health and wellbeing lead, so I'm aware that there are places for putting on a yoga class for staff, or every now and then putting some biscuits in the staff room. Like there is a place for that, but that isn't well-being.
No,
It
that's
helps our well-being, but it's not.
the token to
Yeah.
support the well-being.
It's a gesture. If I can see, I do a walk around every half term. I pop into the classrooms to say, how are things? Um, that's also, when you put all of these things together, you can't just shove some biscuits in the staff room and expect all your staff to be happy. But actually, the physical response that we have to being controlled will be the most detrimental thing to our well-being. And removing that can do far more positive than the odd yoga class or a packet of biscuits. Allowing somebody to speak, be heard, bring themselves, their personality, their loves, their passions, and share them with the children in the class. Not only does it give permission to the children to do the same, but the children love it. Like they love hearing about how I'm writing a book, how I've got two children at home. They know their names. They love that I don't like chocolate really. And they'll go, oh, Miss Smith-Tong, you don't really like chocolate, do you? And they'll bring it up, and they just hold on to that because I'm being human with them. And they really respect that. And they know that they can be human with me. And we were on the bus on our way to a school trip yesterday, and they were chatting to me about their favorite books. And, when a child isn't doing that, we have to be concerned as to why. Like, there's a lot of silencing of children, isn't there? No, we can't talk. We can't collaborate. We need to get our work done, heads down. It's like, where is the being human in all of this? And I've started to refer to it as child admin now, what's going on in classrooms, because it is like a lot of form filling. I mean, admin fills me with dread anyway. I hate doing forms of any kind. But when I see children's books filled with worksheets where the teacher has just had to say something and then they regurgitate it in a form, it is child admin. Like, why are we getting children to do admin? Where is the personality in that? Where can they bring themselves to that? And you know that brings us on to play really, because play is autonomy. That's where they can exercise autonomy.
So, why do you think our policies, governments over the years have become so scared of play in a way that, like, I mean, I remember my eldest from reception to year one, like how he felt it. And I think,
Mm.
like, as a neuro, particularly because we're both like neurodivergent, in fact, all three of us, like the children and I, are neurodivergent, we felt it like really viscerally in our body. Um,
Mm.
this sort of like, oh, now like, now it's all serious, right? Like, no play, no play, no fun. It's all
Yeah.
like very serious learning.
Mm.
So, to you, like, why are we so scared of play? And also the other thing that, like Natalie and I talk a lot about in the book is like almost this fear we have of children and young people,
Hmm.
particularly teenagers, almost like if you give them too much freedom, they're just gonna take over the world. I don't know what
Yeah.
it is.
I think as I think COVID was a huge point where parents started to see into the classroom. It gave them eyes that they could see A, what their children were learning, and B, how they were learning it. And I think they were surprised as to what they saw because they could only imagine what went on in the classroom before. Now they were seeing it. And so they started to speak up about that, rightly so. I think with the poly crisis that's going on, what education has tried to do is to clamp down on it in an attempt to control what they're seeing as this huge outrage of opinions, the SEND crisis, the attendance crisis, the retention crisis. So what they're trying to do is control it. I almost see it as like this bubbling pot, and it's started to bubble over, and they're just putting the lid on and holding it down and hoping that it will just get better. But actually, what we need to do is take the lid off and listen, allow it to calm, and respond to the concerns by change. And I think the fear of play is that it will make the pot bubble more.
Mm.
And so we just can't allow it to happen. We just need to control it.
Me, like, as you say that, like, my first reaction is, if the pan is boiling over, turn the heat down.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Of course, yeah. Yeah. And I guess turning the heat down for them is far too complex.
Well, yeah, because of course that feeds into the other side of the systemic, the rational sort of like dualistic Cartesian way of thinking,
Mm,
you know, which is very much, well, it's simple and linear. So if you do this, you tweak this, then that changes that.
yeah,
And of course, systemically, it's messy. And
yeah.
if you make a change here, chances are you'll have an impact that you've not seen. Like, look at Brexit
Mm,
and how we didn't foresee that suddenly we'd have no nurses and no lorry drivers.
yeah,
Like, that wasn't, nobody would have told you, oh, when you have Brexit, then we won't be able to get our medications like we used to, and you'll have no lorry drivers. Like, nobody
yeah,
would have been able to tell you that. Um,
yeah.
and yet, that's what happens in systems. They respond to the different things because it's
Mm.
alive, and it's yeah, it's not a cog in a machine, or it's not a machine, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we're missing is time, because I went to look around some secondary schools for my son who's 12 now. He's at secondary school now, but last year I was looking around, and I went to one school. I actually wrote an article on it that's on my website because I was shocked at the schools that I saw. I went to look around one school, and I spoke to the children that were showing me around, and I don't know how we got there, but they were talking about the detentions they get. There was a certain word they used for it, and I can't remember, reflections, or I can't remember. It was a word that was covering up what it actually was. And I said, oh, why do you get detentions? They said, oh, we're not allowed to talk in the corridors, and we're not allowed to touch anyone else. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, we're not allowed to high five or like anything like that. And I was like, okay. So I went to the head of year and I said, look, this is what the children have told me. Obviously, that's their perspective. What's your perspective on that? And he said, well, we were getting a lot of complaints about, consent and boundaries. So we had to stop it. And I thought that is so symbolic of what we're going through in the education system, because really the answer to consent and boundaries is education
It's
on
not,
consent and
it's not
boundaries.
stopping
It's
them.
not to stop it outright, because you're silencing something that's going on in their head. So
Yeah.
if we don't deal with it, it's just going to get worse. But that is now what we're doing because we're lacking in time. We're using schemes. I mean, they're the worst introduction to the education system in the last decade. And then we've got no time to deal with the actual human life lessons that are coming up. So instead, we're just going, that's happening and we can't have it happening. So we're just going to stop that.
Yeah, control and make sure
Yeah.
then. Oh wow, that's so yes, yes. Um and of course that's like for me, like it's all about imperfectly perfect conversations. Just talk.
Hmm.
Like and yes, it's gonna be messy. Yes, it's gonna be raw. Yes, there's gonna be like, but that's how we grow and develop. It's like
It's much harder.
yeah,
It's much harder to facilitate that kind of education. I do think that in some ways, I guess I find it harder in that you're going against the grain. So there is that. If we removed that, it might be easier. But of course, when you're responding to things that come up, you are having to think on your feet, but also you have to dedicate time. It's like that moment when all the children come in from playtime and they gather around your desk and they've all had either disagreements or something they want to share with you that's exciting that's happened, or their shoes wet or their socks wet or something, and they all gather around. It's a really overwhelming moment. And quite often I'll say to my reception children, I just need to take a breather because I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed by everybody coming around me. Just taking the time to explain my own human response to it. Would everybody mind sitting on the carpet and I'll just come round and talk to you? Or can you give me 5 minutes, unless it's an emergency? I just need to do the register, then we're going to have a little chat. But then, of course, you have to have the time to have that chat and go through all of the things that have happened. And teachers don't feel they do have the time.
no.
They're not given that time because of the high stakes accountability. They need to get things stuck in books so that they've got something to show the people coming in to do book looks and mock steads and observations. And so we lose that time to be human. And the same with schemes. It's like you've got to follow the scheme, the fidelity to a scheme. You've got to follow the script. You've got to follow the stage directions. And so our time is taken up by that.
And you know what you were talking to, I think in secondary, what happens, of course, is you've got the high accountability towards, I mean, in primary, it starts a little bit with the SATs,
Mm,
and year six, of course, and then the but for GCSE and A levels,
mm,
that's like, I mean, having taught all of those elements for me, um, there is no space for anything because
no.
like part of the reason our eldest was home educated for about 3 years is because post COVID. So, like what you said about parents having their eyes open, the
Mm,
reason I became a recovering teacher as well as a reformed mother is because of COVID and what
mm,
happened. Because suddenly, like you described, I became privy to what both my boys were having to do
mm,
in year six, year five, and year seven, respectively, and then year six, year eight. Um, and I could see how that was impacting on them negatively.
yeah.
They're both neurodivergent, but also because they were struggling in different ways. Um, and I remember going, it hit me like a ton of bricks because I was like, what I see at university, which is why I started my research, right? Like
Mm,
10 years gap, saw the low subjective well-being of the young people when they arrived at university when I returned in 2014. I was like, the reason they arrive so stressed out and the way they are is because of
yeah.
the journey they've had.
Yeah.
Um,
Burned out.
and the crammed in like my youngest was being literally prepared for his SATs in year
Mm,
six. And there's many things he couldn't do, and he kept saying, I'm rubbish, I'm not good enough, I don't. And I was like, no, no, like there is no way you are going to let an exam dictate who you think you are.
Yeah,
um
yeah,
but many, but equally, because I was trained to believe in like qualifications lead to success, lead to like the good job,
yeah,
I also, there was a part of me that believed in that system.
yeah. Well, we're kind of forced to, aren't we? Because we're made to feel that we're letting our children down if we don't invest in it, because what life chances are they going to have without it? And that's capitalism, isn't it? We are working towards something all the time. There is always a working towards, which is why I always say, we are not preparing them for something. This is it right now. Like we've got to stop. And I think that's why it's moved, instead of play being amazing and moving up, we've got the formal model moving down, and now it's invading our early years classrooms. Um, we've got to remove that fear, but that's hard work, and that requires people to look within, and that's a big job for many people. Um, and I think the first step is noticing it's happening, because I do think in education, to survive, a lot of people have stopped thinking about what isn't working because they've got to survive. They've got to get through the workload. And actually, it's allowing yourself that pause to go, this system that's been sold to us, is it actually working? Do what will happen if my child doesn't pass their maths exam? And I mean, personally, I failed well, I say I failed at school. I came out with some GCSEs, which was astonishing to me because I really thought that I wouldn't. But I mean, I was the child with my head on the desk. I didn't even open my maths paper because I can't retain information for a very long period of time. So even my own book, actually, I'll probably there'd be things that people would say to me and I go, did I write that? My memory's pretty poor. And so we're going into an exam where I've got to remember dates, names, methods, formulas. It just doesn't showcase what I can do. And I really think that until I had my first child at 29, that I didn't really think that I could do anything. And then becoming a mother made me realize, oh, actually, maybe I can, maybe there is something in there. And as soon as I started to unpick it, I was like, oh, I'm capable, actually. I can do stuff. And so, you think that's a whole decade of my 20s was me just thinking, well, I can't really do much, but let's see what comes out of this.
And you know what you're pointing to is like that inner journey, right? Like
Mm,
for me, it, I'm 51 and I'm still shedding, like
mm,
still figuring out who is Fabian. Like
yeah,
that it's just constantly going, is this really serving me as a belief?
yeah,
And what I'm hearing you say, I think often we talk about the system and then the individual, right? Like the me and the we,
right, yeah,
as if they're separate. But actually the reality is the me and we, they dance with each other.
mm,
And so and my eldest often says, like when I say, oh, the system is like, mum, that does, like the system is you, me, everybody.
we are the system.
So don't use words like the system because
Mm,
it's so easy to hide behind that word.
yeah, it's so true. That and actually that detachment you're talking about is also another huge problem. Like the something like the SEND and attendance crisis. Let's use the attendance crisis. I think actually it works really well with that. If you think about the attendance crisis, teachers and educators, anyone working in schools are going, oh, an attendance crisis. We don't know what to do with this. It's like there's an attendance crisis. Instead of stepping back, we step in. What are we doing wrong?
Yeah.
This isn't being done to us. This has been done as a result of what we are doing and taking responsibility. I see it all the time. People just going, oh, things are different now. We've got different children coming in. It's different. But it's like, well, it might feel different, but it's different because something isn't working. Something we are doing isn't working.
And
And that looking within is just, it's being done to us. It's not our fault.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because actually for me, like the attendance crisis is because now parents and young people realize they don't have
Yeah.
to be in school.
Parents are advocating for their children because that they've lost trust in a system that isn't inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know from my own daughter, she feels it all the time. She will say that I'm different to everybody else and that I can't do the things that they're asking me to do. So every day she is set up to fail. And that's going to impact so negatively on the children. And it doesn't need to be this idea that we have kind of mainstream education and then we have our SEND group. It just needs to be that our education system respects the individual and that we can be inclusive.
Yeah.
And it's not a difficult thing to do if we are not trapped in boundaries that are so strong that we can't, or at least we feel we can't break them down.
Yeah, for me, like that feeds into what I wrote in like the flourishing students, which is everybody's a unique ecosystem. You
Mm,
have to be curious and discover what type of ecosystem you have in front of you, what
yeah,
type of plant, because an orchid hasn't got the same needs as a climbing ivy. And
no,
unless you understand that, and like beautifully, you understand why this child is holding the pen this way,
yeah,
behaving in a certain way. And it goes back to what you were saying about when people feel seen, heard, and held. You know, when you lean in and become curious about who are you, what are you, what
mm,
makes you tick, what are your challenges,
yeah.
then that's expansive, not like, oh yeah, you're a cog in the machine, off you go on this
Mm.
way
I'm
about.
finding the joy in that. As a teacher, I find joy in the fact that every single child in my class is different. I find joy in interacting. I don't try to um, analyze the why so much. It's like they are who they are and they're respected and they're held and they're loved in the same way that everyone else is, or even in a different way. That it's I think we're starting to see the individual as a problem, as because they're not the same. It's like they're humans, they're going to be different, rather than seeing it as a challenge. It's like that double arrow, adding another layer onto the problem. It's not a problem that they're individual. That's how it should be.
God, right, like the imagine
Yeah.
if we're all like cookie cutters.
How boring would my job be? I would hate it.
I know that would be
Yeah.
cool. Like, yeah, completely. I'm so completely with you.
Mm.
So, Sophie, I'm conscious we've meandered a lot. Is there a question I haven't asked you about your work, about the book specifically, that you're sitting here thinking, oh, I so wish Fabian had given me this opportunity to talk about that?
No, not at all. I mean, you can just find out more about what I do at mindfulnessforlearning.com. Everything is on there. And I love people to get in touch. I love talking to educators and hearing about their experiences. So
Amazing. And the book you said comes out on the 22nd?
22nd of January, you can pre-order it now. It's on Amazon and Routledge and most book websites.
Amazing. So I'll put links to that because
Lovely.
um so anything else you would like to share before I ask you the last question?
No, I think that I've shared everything. Thank you, Fabienne. It's
Yeah,
been really, really lovely to talk to you.
yeah, same here. I feel like there's a lot of synergy and
Yeah.
it's been
I look forward to reading your book.
I'm so glad I wrote two books. My first book is The Flourishing Students, which is
Yes, I saw that. It's on your website, isn't it?
yeah.
And I'll definitely order it.
The second book is I co-authored with Dr. Dominic Thompson for parents, and it's called
Amazing.
How to Grow Grown Up.
Oh, amazing. I will definitely order those.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's yes. I mean, I don't often talk about my books. It's one of those things. I'm slowly starting to sort of talk about my journey as a recovering teacher and like
Yeah.
finding my place, finally grounding myself in the field of education and sort of knowing who I am and
Yeah.
my gift is not. But it's definitely been a journey. So ongoing.
Oh, yeah, it is. It's hard, isn't it, to talk about what you're doing, and it definitely didn't come naturally to me. I think I've had to find a way around it. But yeah, it is. I think as educators, we don't always do that because it's about the other people usually, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's the focus isn't on us.
And I think also there's something around the being the working class and the white, well, obviously white working class female.
Hmm.
I talk a lot of for my PhD, I talk a lot about, or I read a lot of indigenous scholars and black scholars, in particular
Mm.
female scholars, and I echo like a lot of what they say resonates deeply with me.
Hmm.
I think many of us don't take our rightful place in this garden called life.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. Imposter syndrome is real and commonplace for me.
Yeah, well, I think
Mm.
yes, for many of us, right?
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
not been like the beautiful work you're doing with these young children, allowing them to just be themselves,
Mm.
means that they can find their rightful place in this world. Um,
Yeah,
and what a gift, right?
yeah. Yeah, it is beautiful and it's extremely rewarding. And that's the thing. The job is so much more enjoyable as a result of that. So
Mm,
yeah.
amazing. So, given we've meandered so much, I wonder if there's anything for you in this imperfectly perfect, perfectly imperfect conversation um, that you're taking away and or that you want to leave us with, and that can be both.
Yeah, I think just for, the importance of people pausing and reflecting on what they're doing in the classroom and really listening to how they're feeling about delivering what they're delivering to children, but how they feel when they're interacting with their senior leaders, just really tuning into it because I think they might notice something. And I think that's the beginning of the journey for change is noticing what's happening first.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabienne.